Do we have folks online, Carbon? Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for staying inside on a sunny afternoon. What's that? It's a challenge, I'm sure it is. That's why we have all these windows, right? So this is a forum about who speaks for OUUC. There's some new policy about this that we want to go over and how we got there. I'm Reverend Mary. I use she, her pronouns. And with me is Susan Moon, president of the board. And we'll do what we do when we gather is light a chalice. These words are from Crystal Hogan. We ignite this flame, symbol of our faith, to beckon us into community, warm our hearts with love, and give us a light to follow as we carry our faith into action. So Carbon, could I have the slides up? Let's see. Thank you. So what we're going to present about today is who represents the congregation. And there's some new policy that the board has developed and that the operations staff and I have developed. And so a reasonable question would be, well, so why do we need a policy about who speaks for OUUC? Isn't what we were doing just fine? And so a big reason is that we're in a current political climate that's very divisive. And it's really important that we be able to speak our values and put our faith into action in the public square and take positions that are in alignment with our values. And as you heard Reverend Sarah say this morning, there are a whole variety of views and perspectives. Even though we might share our values, we have different ways of coming to our opinions. And so that's the second reason we need a policy is we're adapting to growth. As we welcome more people, we are inclusive, we welcome diversity. That means that we can share the same values and come to different opinions about the same topic. And so how do we create a space where all of those opinions are welcome? The third reason is that the bylaws suggest that there is a board policy about who speaks for OUUC, and we didn't have one. So might be a good idea to do that. And then the last reason is that the governance model that was adopted by OUUC in 2014 uses policies as the way to determine how power and authority are allocated. That's called policy-based governance. And so what we do is we create policies and then we put them into place to do the work that we do together. I'll turn it over to Susan.
Good morning. After Sarah's sermon, I want to acknowledge that the girl who grew up Southern Baptist feels like I might be going to hell because I'm wearing a t-shirt when I'm standing in front of the whole church. The second part of that is this is the OUUC Side with Love t-shirt. And this is what they are available actually, not that I meant to sell. But this is what I'm usually wearing when I'm thinking about who speaks for OUUC because this is what I wear to protests. So I wore this on purpose, even if I am going to hell because of it. So Reverend Sarah's sermon was perfect for this discussion. And so one of the difficulties of having an organization that is more involved with questions is that you then have to have some policy so that there's not just utter chaos. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about the structure of the church, which sounds like it should be pretty boring and might be because it's beautiful outside and sunny, but also is how we can live together as a group of people who don't all agree with each other about almost anything. So that's what the structure of this is. So when you hear this and you think about the fact that this enables us to do the good work we do, having these kind of routines and things set up. So the most important type of policy we have is the OUUC bylaws. Bylaws are, and all of this stuff is so important to us that if you go on the website and you click on the Who We Are button, these are all found there because this is who we are. This is how we decide to be together as a group. So the first one is the bylaws, and that's because the congregation is the final authority, and bylaws are voted on by the congregation. To change a word of any bylaw, we bring it to the annual meeting and we have to have a majority of people vote for it. So the bylaws are what the congregation has said, this is how we want the church to work. And it's kind of interesting to read it. Usually you read it when you're mad about something, but there's actually information in there that can be really fun to read about. The bylaws inform the board, and I'm the president of the board this year for 6 more weeks. And what happens is we develop a governance policy, and that is a list of things that we think interpret the bylaws and should be a way for the framework for the church to work with. So that's where the governance comes from. That is also under the Who We Are tab on the website. So this is developed by the board to help define how we share power. And I thought that was a really important thought, that we share power, because we do have power as a group and we want to make sure that we're sharing it appropriately. And then once the governance policy is developed, and this is an ongoing process all the time by the board, we have a governance committee, we vote about everything. Then Reverend Mary and Reverend Sarah and the rest of the staff develop an operational policy, which is how the church actually operates. So, it goes from maybe what is kind of a big goal in the bylaws all the way down to how we can treat people well in the service by making sure that we have what disabled people need. So it's a kind of a hierarchy, and that's how we make all these decisions. The other thing that we've talked about a lot the last few years is if you don't have bylaws that reflect what you actually do and governance that reflects what you do, it changes all the time. And so this is a way for us to really have kind of a roadmap and to make sure that even though our leadership turns over, we are consistent with how we implement things. And that helps with fairness. So we have the bylaws, which inform the governance policy, which informs the operational policy. And then, of course, Reverend Mary's going to get to talk about the governmental rules that impact how we do things as a church. So those are the kind of 4 ways that we end up deciding what to do. So process for these policies, Reverend Mary said, look, if you look in these 3 different places, they contradict each other. How do I know who can speak for OUUC? And as she mentioned, the last 10 years, I guess, but certainly in this last couple of years, we have so many things going on with the government and with decisions that are being made about people that have something to do with our values and how we want people to be treated. So this is something that comes up more and more because we get more and more, there's more and more activity around immigration. Reverend Mary is more and more likely to get a request from somebody to please help or please ratify this or please sign this. The UUA, which is our umbrella organization, is more likely to try to take a public policy so that people know what we support. And so it's really been even more important for us to have a way to describe it and for us to agree on it. So Reverend Mary asked for clarification. The governance committee drafted a policy. Once we draft the policy, Reverend Mary and Reverend Sarah draft how it's actually going to work in practice, which is the operational policy. And then they go back because we have faith in action groups, which are what they say, faith in action. So those are the way that we live out our values. You can sit in here all day and say that you want to help people, but unless you're actually doing something to help feed people or keep them safe or, build houses or something, you're not really living out your action. So Faith in Action is a group that is frequently asked to take policy opinions and also are the way that we kind of put our feet on the ground to do the work we want to do. So we adopted a governance policy in the board in February of 2026 and accepted the operational policy that Reverend Mary and Reverend Sarah gave us in February 2026. So the bylaws, one of the things I had never even noticed, and as I said, the bylaws are the big thing that the congregation approves. In the section under membership and responsibilities of membership, it says, members shall not represent themselves as speaking on behalf of the congregation unless authorized in accordance with the Board of Trustees, board policy. So I can say, I think all the houses in Olympia should be purple. I cannot say, OUUC thinks all the houses in Olympia should be purple. Oh, Sarah has a purple house, so she thinks they should all be purple. So this is a way of getting from what we are as individuals to what we are as a whole group. And that's actually in the bylaws, which is the most powerful part of our policy because it's approved by the congregation. And then the governance policy, which is the second layer. And you can tell how exciting the governance manual is because there are all these sections. Fritz is laughing because he helped write it. So this is section 3, which is delegation of authority by the board. And this is matters retained by the board. So there's a bunch of stuff we delegate to the minister just off the top. The following matters are retained by the board, though the board may, on a case-by-case basis, secure the advice or assistance of the minister in carrying out these functions. We have a really good relationship with Reverend Mary. We talk all the time, all of us, at the board meeting. So really, it's kind of both of us. But when push comes to shove, the board is responsible for implementing policies. And one of the things we're responsible for is taking positions on behalf of OUC on matters of interest to the public, to the Unitarian Universalist Association or other entities external to OUUC. I will let you know before I turn it back over to Reverend Mary that what most frequently happens is she will get a contact from someone who will say, could you please agree to this? Could you please publicize this? Could you please do something? And so it comes to her first, and then the board either weighs in or we give her advance notice that it's fine for her to sign on to certain things. So that's what we're talking about. We are all alive in the world now and can imagine how many different immigration issues and poverty issues and violence issues have come up in the last couple of years because things are so stressful right now. So, and now I'm turning it over to Reverend Mary and she gets to talk about the federal government.
Not about the federal government per se, because that might take a while, but there's federal guidance for churches that is relevant here. So we've talked about our bylaws, our board governance policies. One of the other things we have to take into account is that we as a church are a nonprofit. And so there are federal and state laws that apply to nonprofits. As a church, we are also tax exempt. That means we don't pay any taxes, we don't pay property taxes, and so we don't want to do anything that disrupts our tax exempt status. So there is IRS guidance for churches about politics, which essentially says we cannot engage in any political campaign activity. So in the last couple years, we've had folks show up here. We had a person in the congregation running for office who came on a Sunday and said, I want to hand out my election materials. You can't do that here. It jeopardizes our tax exempt status. It doesn't have anything to do with our support for this person. It has everything to do with our federal status as far as the IRS concerned. We also can't make statements opposing candidates. And so you may have noticed during the election, and what you will hear in regarding future elections is I tend to not name candidates, even federal candidates. I will talk about our values and positions that are in opposition to our values or how we oppose positions that a government is taking. So it's not directed at a candidate per se, it's directed at platforms and values and what I think that we need to do. So those are 3 levels we've talked about: bylaws, governance policy, and the IRS restriction that we live within regarding politics. Are there any questions about that so far before I get to the operational policy? Carbon, anything online? Okay, great. So as Susan said, the board looked at the bylaws, wrote a governing policy which essentially says that the board retains responsibility and authority for speaking for OUUC unless they delegate it. And so then Reverend Sarah and I were working on a policy about how to address controversial and political issues at OUUC. Because we were getting lots of requests for various things, and we'll continue to do that. It's one of the things that we want to do as a faith community is to put our faith in action and take positions on things. So where does that sit? So the purpose statement seemed really important to me, and it was recognizing that there are many opinions that can come from our alignment in values. And so we can disagree in the parameters of our covenant, and that we are bound to not do certain kinds of political activities, and so we wanted to be able to recognize that. So the policy, this is the operational policy, it defines what's a controversial or political topic. So it's any legislation, ballot measure, or election that's being debated now, or any issue that is expected to be in the public eye within the next year. And then an issue that will impact different members of our community in different ways, or where there's competing interests and needs, all of which might be in alignment with Unitarian Universalist values. So what do those words mean? Well, let me give you an example. One of our Faith in Action groups came through Reverend Sarah and said, we want to boycott these companies. And, you know, boycotts are reasonable ways to let companies know that we're not in agreement. We also knew that there are members of this congregation who work for those companies. Maybe they might, so Paula said they might want to boycott them too. They might not if their jobs are at risk, you know, if they're forbidden from taking a position against their company, or if they're going to lose their job and that's how they support their family. And so it's not as straightforward. And so what we want is a forum, is a way to be able to talk about what are all of the different competing interests and diverse ways that we can be in community, hold the same values, and come to a different decision or opinion about whether or not we should take an action. Is that making sense? So a couple recent examples we put in the policy, the Workers' Bill of Rights measure in Olympia. This is an example that I use because Reverend Sarah and I had very different opinions about this. We have different life experience and we have different responsibilities in the congregation. We hold the same values. I want workers to be paid fairly just like Reverend Sarah does. I have to balance the budget, Reverend Sarah doesn't. Right? So we have really different roles here. And the financial impact on the congregation was really big. And the board knew that as well. So we had some discussion around that. And then the Chehalis Dam project was another one. So the policy ends, the operational policy ends with questions. So what we're asking people to consider when they're wanting to bring a topic forward is to go through these questions. And what was really helpful from the Faith in Action teams was they said, these are great questions. We want you to tell us what we should do under each of those things. And so the subparts of each of these were recommended by the Faith in Action teams. So the first is it on the ballot or in a part of an upcoming election? Because if the answer is yes, then it's off the table for IRS reasons, not because of anything we might believe, or we just don't even have that option, unless we want to put our tax-exempt status at risk. And then second is, what is your purpose? And we talk about things like educating people on the issue as a whole, telling a story, seeking input about something, inviting discussion about something, or building skills regarding a controversial topic. What then it's appropriate to share. What we're asking not be shared is one-sided advocacy for only one position. Now, I want to be clear that we are not the League of Women Voters, right? When the League has speakers, they're very careful about we have to have a Republican and a Democrat, and try to navigate that. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that if a speaker is going to come and talk about an issue where there can be different perspectives, we want that speaker to acknowledge and talk about those other perspectives. They can talk about their position, but there was a speaker recently, I think it was about trees, right, who did a really good job of this. It was one speaker, talked about her organization, talked about the issue they were working on, and talked about what was controversial and what the other points of view were. And so it was a more balanced perspective, acknowledging that there are different ways to approach this. Is that making some sense to folks in what we're looking for? So then what do you want to have happen? What are the different points of, oh, yes, John, thanks.
There's a question keeps coming up for me. We in the EAT group, we had this discussion. We want to bring in controversial speakers. How is it possible to do that in the church and without saying we're speaking for OUUC? Does that make sense?
I think what you're saying is, can the EAT have a speaker come, say, to a forum and it not be perceived as OUC is endorsing this?
Something like that, yeah.
I would have a hard time understanding how we could present a forum and not have it seem that we're endorsing it. Now, that's a question we can certainly talk about, because Reverend Sarah, if you're on the social action list, faith and action list, Reverend Sarah every week puts out a whole bunch of activities, and there's a disclaimer at the top of that, which is part of the policy, which says OUC doesn't endorse any of these things. These are actions that you as an individual can take. What's different is that we're using our communal space, our connections in the community, our Zoom link and our space, virtually and otherwise, to say we think this is important and we're advocating for this. That's probably the position I would take, John. So my ask of the EAT would be, how can you present this in a more balanced way? It doesn't mean it can't be controversial. It's how can you present it in a more balanced way? Does that answer your question? And we can sure talk about that more. Carbon, question from online.
Two online, so we'll start with from Susan O'Connor there.
Yeah, so Susan said Resistance Lab wanted to alert congregation about the boycott so people could make an individual choice. So that's wanting to educate people about an option that's available. That would have been something that could have gone through the action items that Reverend Sarah put out. What we didn't want was a forum about it or a way for it to be presented so that it might be harmful for the folks who are impacted in other ways. And the other question? Yes, of course. So Wendy's question has to do with the Chehalis Dam, and shouldn't the environment be front and center? Of course it is, and the interconnection of things is a big part of who we are. And it is possible to hold the environment as an important topic and an important value for us and have a different opinion about the dam. That's the issue here. It's to acknowledge that you can hold the same values, and depending on how you prioritize those values, you might come out with a different opinion about a topic than someone else does. So that really was the issue about the Chehalis Dam.
So how do we talk about something that might step on someone's toes in some unknown way?
Sure.
Because the environmental action team is a small group of people just trying to do things to make the environment better.
Right.
We're not trying to wage war or speak on behalf of the church. We just all happen to be members of this church, and we all meet here because we are members here.
Right. Well, I would have a little bit different perspective on that, Paula. The environmental action team is a team of the congregation. So it's actually one of the larger faith and action teams. It's a group of individuals, and when you come together, you are coming together in this space as members of a congregation with shared Unitarian Universalist values. And so you're not independent of the congregation. And so what the policy is inviting you to consider is, what do the issues that you as the EAT are taking up, how does that land with other people in the congregation? And what we're asking is, if you don't know, ask. Ask around. Talk to other people. Do you have a different point of view on this? And how might we take that into consideration? This isn't making sense to you, it looks like, by the look on your face. So is it the attending to other positions that's challenging for you?
We may be a big team on paper. We may be a big team on paper, but we're a very small group that show up and try to find ways to make a difference.
Okay.
And for us to have to go around and poll the congregation and see if somebody has a different viewpoint does not make sense.
So then I would ask a larger theological question. How do we be together in community when we disagree about things? How do we have those conversations? Because that's really where we are as a nation and as a community right now. How do we bridge the differences? How do we listen across those differences? And how do we be together in the covenant that we make in a way that allows for different opinions to be apparent? I mean, that really is the question about how we are together in community. And so I know that this is different than how the EAT has operated before. And I'm asking you to operate differently, and the board is asking you to operate differently.
Reverend Mary, this is more of a comment than a question. And it really kind of made me think about a specific environmental topic, say legacy forest. So if you really fairly look at that from this type of perspective, you need to look at the impact that families occur with this industry. And if you are displacing that economic, how do you displace the value of the workers?
Right.
And it even goes further. It's like state is funding schools by cutting down trees, which is not sustainable. So how do we address state financing? So I look at it as more of a 360 view of an issue.
That's exactly
And
right.
so as we discuss it, we need to discuss the logging industry, we need to discuss school financing,
Absolutely.
we need to discuss it all.
Right.
So that's kind of how I'm viewing it. So.
Thank you so much for that, because any environmental issue is way more complicated than this is what we should believe. It's always way more complicated than that, because if it wasn't, we would fix it. The facts that we haven't fixed it means that there's competing legitimate needs and views here. And that's what we're asking is, let's talk about the competing legitimate needs and views that we can all hold within the same values that we share. Susan?
So I hope I can say this appropriately. Is there a difference between, I'll use EAT as an example, EAT sending a forum to Reverend Sarah to make it public? You know, not a forum here, but so-and-so is going to speak about this issue and sending it to put on Reverend Sarah's list, versus the way you have to handle something if you actually wanted to have a speaker come and speak. And can you ask the speaker who is very opposed to something to include what the people that are, would that be enough? That you ask the speaker, please also cover what the opposition says about this. Would that take care of it?
Sure. So two parts to that question.
Right.
One is, can the EAT or any team send items to Reverend Sarah to put on the action list? Absolutely. You get them all the time, right, Sarah? And you are scanning lots of sources to be able to say to folks, we're not endorsing these. These are actions that you can take as an individual. That's different than requesting that church resources be used for a forum, for a speaker. And then on the topic of, would it be okay to just have two opposing views on a particular item? Maybe yes, maybe no. It really depends and would take some conversation. So an example is, there are going to be two initiatives on the ballot in the fall that are anti-trans initiatives. In this congregation, would we have someone in favor of discriminating against trans individuals and someone against it? No. We wouldn't, because it's part of our values that every person is holy, and we're not going to make a pulpit for someone who is going to come in here and be against individuals in our congregation who are transgender. That's not a forum that we would provide. So our involvement, the congregation's involvement in those initiatives is something that's going to go to the board next month for discussion about what do we do with these? How can we talk about them? What can we present on them? Are we willing to have forums here to talk about how to fight these initiatives? Is it in alignment with our values? So it really depends, Susan, and that's part of the conversation that we're asking is if the EAT wants to bring an issue, great. Let's hear about it. Let's talk about it. What are the different perspectives? What are the possibilities of what might be present here in the congregation, and how can we talk about them? Did that help?
So it's not necessarily a matter of you can't do something one-sided. It's that if you're going to use church resources, you need to get input from the board and talk about how it's going to be used before you do it. You can't just do it without getting some kind of clearance. Is that correct?
Well, I think at least clearance through Reverend Sarah and I, and
Yeah.
we're going to ask to go through these questions. And then if it's something where we're actually taking a position, then it's going to go to the board because the board policy is you all have retained that authority and power. You haven't delegated that to me. Now, the board has delegated some other things, and Susan's going to talk about those in a minute, but that's where we are. Carbon, was there someone else online?
There are several.
Several.
So we'll start with this one from Susan.
What is, we noted,
It's a if. What if?
what if we noted a disclaimer on an event or an action that this is not endorsed by OUUC? You mean we had a forum and said this is not endorsed by OUUC? Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I would have a hard time understanding how something that was housed at OUUC and put on by an OUUC team wouldn't be endorsed by OUUC. I mean, there are organizations that rent our building, and we ask them to be in alignment with our values. And we don't endorse them in that way because they're renting our space, but we do ask them to be in alignment in some way. The other thing I'll say about this is these questions are really helpful because policies are words on paper. Once the words are on paper, we have to figure out how they work in real life. And so asking these questions and coming up with, we want to present this thing, what does this look like in light of the new policy? That's how we're going to flesh out, does this make sense? Is there parts of the policy that need to change? I already have a question to bring to the board about how we're doing things that needs clarification, I think, from them. So please keep asking the questions and stay in conversation. It doesn't mean that you need to stop doing what you're doing. It means that there needs to be more deliberation and conversation about what you might want to offer.
And the other thing that I would say is that there are board mechanisms to make decisions quickly. In the governance manual, we can make decisions via email, so you don't have to think, oh, that'll take months. Mm-hmm. If it's something that is emergent, we have mechanisms to handle that in a quick way as well.
I think there was another question on board and line, and then,
A few more. We have some that were
okay.
So, here from Wendy is the next one.
So I understand Dave's idea, but again, this sounds like a league presentation. Having a tree advocate talk about schools and workers sounds like too tall of an order for a small advocacy group. It sounds like the Legacy Forest person did a really good job of that. Yeah, so it's possible.
And then this one from Nathaniel.
And what if we can show that the opposing view is not evidence-based? There is a lot of misinformation about many controversial topics. Of course there is. And you know, again, Susan, that's a theoretical question. It would be helpful to have a specific situation to talk about where, you know, what's evidence-based and what isn't, and how do we combat misinformation.
And
So-
there's one above that. Nathaniel's is actually above that comment.
Oh, how do we talk about competing legitimate views in a way that does not violate our values but represents both sides? Well, that's the question, Nate. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do here is to acknowledge that there are competing legitimate views, and that we also don't want to give a platform, like I said, for someone who is, you know, supporting violating the rights of transgender individuals. That would be against our values. So that's the discussion we need to have about what is in alignment with our values, the broadest way that we can interpret our values, and what really is against our values. Those are the boundaries that we're defining all the time. And honestly, this current federal government is challenging us to define those boundaries every single day.
There's another
There's
comment?
one last quote from Ann Huntley there.
It starts with wisdom.
The wisdom I see in this policy is that it delegates tending to the big raw feelings around difficult topics from church staff and board to other congregation members. It offers this spiritual work, difficult conversations, back to congregants, which is where it belongs. The board and the staff want to support the conversations. We want you to have them. I mean, that's the invitation.
I think
How
your
big a
hand was up
perspective can you
first.
have?
This feels, or it has been feeling like, I mean, none of us can meet everybody's needs or expectations.
That's right.
And we're never going to get 100% consensus on everything.
That's right.
Except for our values. And as we generalize those as individuals and in the community, right? And I'm assuming that anything that happens here comes out of an understanding and a heartfelt holding of our values. But this situation has felt like if there was one person who disagreed with how we wanted to move forward, which for the group that I'm involved with was purely informational, wanting to provide information to our biggest social group. And because it feels like my values would say, if I say boycott, it would be a good, if you want to use boycott as one of your methods of protest or resistance, these are the companies that have been found that would be good targets. And if somebody works there that we know, and they work there for a multitude of reasons, including I have to keep my job no matter what because I have kids and all of those things, which I completely understand. It seems to me that my values don't change the intent of the purpose of the action. How I would walk my values out in that is to support that person. And say, this is hard, we understand, if you want to find another job, we'll help you, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not judging the individual. We are absolutely not judging the individual.
Right.
So it has felt that because there might be hurt feelings or misunderstanding or I don't even know, then I should just be quiet.
Okay.
And so I have, my response to some of this was, oh, this sounds like fear, which I understand. I mean, I am scared too. And, and it sounds like oppressing a voice, that's important. And the only thing that holds us here is the values, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole purpose of UU. So, and I mean, I have sat in lots of meetings since I started coming here to see how people think and to see how people resolve conflict. And I've been super impressed every single time I've gone to a meeting. But I've never seen full consensus.
Right.
And so, I don't know. It doesn't feel good. Nothing feels good. And I just feel like if everybody who is taking action out of this space and out of this community based on our values. And if somebody wants to say, yeah, I think you're wrong, I wouldn't approach it that way. Well, I mean, I can't even go to dinner here without that happening.
Right.
You know? And I don't see why, if we're not saying UU says this is who we're going to back, we think you should too, you know, making very direct political statements like that. Outside of that, we're functioning out of our values, you know, and if we can't do it out of here, I mean, this is a place of safety,
Right.
and where we can come together even though we don't agree about everything.
Right. So
I don't know why we have to, why we would have, I want to be able to stand up and say, well, this is what I think, and this is why I think it, and this is what I'm going to do about it, and if you are so inclined, here's information about it.
And you feel like this is telling you you can't do that?
Yes.
Okay. That's not the intention here at all. So, so let me be clear and say again, this isn't telling any individuals that you can't take whatever position you want to take. You can wear your Side with Love t-shirt wherever you want to wear it. What this policy is trying to do is to say, when we take a position as a congregation saying OUUC stands for this, there has to be a process that we go through that takes into consideration all of our values and all of the diversity of our opinions in the congregation. So the issue about diversity is that there are always folks whose voices are on the margins. And what we're trying to do is to say, how can we make sure that we're hearing those voices of the folks who don't sit on the faith and action teams, who we already know are impacted by what's happening in the wider world in our community, who are just hanging on by their fingernails. They exist in this congregation. How can we make sure that their voices are heard? So in terms of the boycott request from the Resistance Lab, what I would have liked to see, and maybe didn't articulate this well or wasn't clear about this at the time, was we want to put out information about this boycott. Okay, do that through the Faith in Action list. If you want to do something else, then how are we going to make a plan for how to address when someone comes and says, I work for this organization that my church is boycotting. I don't know what to do with that. And the church was taking a stand about a boycott if we were going to do something other than the Faith in Action list. So if we're going to say, we'll help you get a job, we want to acknowledge that, you know, you can be in a different place, then how do we do that publicly? When we take a stand, this is what we stand for, we can also say, these folks are going to be impacted, maybe in negative ways, and we want to help support you. This is how we're going to do that. Because our intention and our impact can be two different things. We talk about this all the time. Our intention is to let corporations who are doing harmful things know that we don't like it. The impact of that is that we have people in our community whose livelihood is dependent on those corporations. Those two things exist at the same time, and the possible impact of our taking a stand against a company might be that somebody in our congregation is at risk. What are we going to do about that? So it's asking for a full discussion and a plan for taking a public stand that takes into account not only our intention, but our impact as well.
I don't think that our intention, I believe, was to create a flyer that says, if boycotting is, you know, your thing, these are the companies that we can say, go for them, kind of thing. And then, if needed, it sounds like, put on the bottom that
Right.
this is not the stated position of UU.
Right. And, I mean,
But the intention also, I think, this is our biggest social group right here, was to, this is where we know people, this is where we can access people, and, we can give them information.
sure. So,
And so, yeah.
I mean, the other thing I want to say about the boycott issue is that this came up last fall. We didn't have a policy. We didn't have any guidance from the board. There was nothing. None of this existed at the time that you made this request. So I made the best decision I could, and now we have a process. So if the Resistance Lab were to come forward and say, now we want to educate the congregation about boycott opportunities, we would have a different conversation because now we have guidance about how we're supposed to handle that. I mean, that's all I can say about the timing of that. Of course, we would handle it differently now. So John, and then folks online. Thanks, Carbon.
So a question seems pretty big to me, comes from your response about the trans bills or initiatives coming up for a vote. We are, and you said that our congregation is absolutely against those.
I didn't say that.
Well, okay.
I said it's going to go to the board because the board retained responsibility for making a decision about whether OUC is against those.
Okay,
I want to be really clear.
Okay, I get that, but the covenant, our beliefs, our values
Right.
are absolutely for the trans people. How far would we be willing to go to support those values, to put them out? And it sounds like there would be legal consequences, so we'd have to bring lawsuits to our government, and it would get very expensive, and it would endanger our community and our church. Seems like it's very dangerous for us to take those actions, but that's something that is in our values, is to risk the big questions.
Right.
Maybe we could come together with other churches to bring a class action lawsuit against the government for the tax
Right.
laws. How far would we go?
So, John, that assessment of risk is the job of the board, right? So the board would make a decision about, would taking a public stand on these actions make OUC a target for the anti-trans folks? It might. And so that's part of the risk that the board has to assess. The other thing I'll say is that we are part of a denomination that joins on to class action suits all the time. We are, the UUA, the Unitarian Universal Association, is on several class action suits against the government right now. So we have a denomination that's working on our behalf to say this is against our values as a denomination. And the dues that we pay to the UUA as a congregation, that's what helps the UUA do that kind of work. We have not paid our full share of dues in my entire time here. And I don't know that we'll be able to do that again this year. And so if we as a congregation really want to help support that work at the national level, we probably ought to talk about how we can pay our fair share of dues. Is that what you were going to say, Sarah, about, yeah, our denomination does that work? So, yeah, thanks, Carbon.
So first, we have these two from Wendy Stephenson, the red picture there.
Yeah.
If
If
a FIA.
a Faith in Action team wants to have a forum, how is it pre-approved? As it has been for quite some time. It goes to Reverend Sarah. She'll bring it to me. We'll have a conversation, and we'll decide if it needs to go to the board. And what we'll do is we'll ask for you to have gone through the questions in the policy and to have a pretty good idea laid out about how you're going to address this in a way that is as balanced as possible.
And then below that, this policy
May water down action on social and environmental action. I'm going to say again, this policy isn't about what you as individuals do. It doesn't affect that at all. You as individuals can do whatever you want. This policy is about the public stance that OUUC takes on particular issues, how OUUC resources get used, the building, the staff time, the public face of OUUC. That's why the board is saying we want to retain responsibility for this because we are visible in the public eye and we want to have some control over what that looks like. This is about use of OUUC resources, including the public face. It's not about anything that you as individuals do.
We just can't do it out of the space.
I'm sorry?
We just shouldn't do it out of the space, because it might be misinterpreted.
That's not what I'm saying at all, Lorraine. So Lorraine said we can't do it out of this space because it might be misinterpreted. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is let's talk about the ways that this particular issue might be approached by people sharing the same values that we do. This is not about fear. This is not about one person is upset because, geez, there is at least one person upset with me every single week, right? This is not about one person being upset. This is about how we are as a community, how we can hold space for differing points of view, and how we present that publicly.
And I think from the board perspective also, if you kind of flip it and think, once the board backs it, we've got your back. And so I think it's a way of making sure that we can be supportive, again, when it's OUUC, not when it's Lorraine, but when it's OUUC. If we say we are supporting this and the board has supported it, we are on record, and you have a more powerful group behind you to help you should something happen.
Right, right. Yeah, Carbon,
And there's a pretty lengthy one online, so I'll go ahead and read it.
thank you.
So Nathaniel says, I understand needing to avoid actions that would endanger our tax-exempt status, but I also think that it is important to not let this hold us hostage about standing up for our values. Giving someone a platform that violates our recognition of our place in the interconnected web of life is similar to allowing someone to have a platform against transgender people. Putting factual information out about a topic and letting people know, and letting people form their opinions and take action should be nonpartisan. I think it is important to recognize that conflict is normal and healthy, and we need to speak up with our points of view, but then fully support the decisions that are made as a church for our community.
Thank you, Nate. And you're right, there may be situations where we want to take a risk. Supporting our transgender individuals is taking a risk right now in this political climate. And so that's a discussion that the board needs to have about what risk are we willing to take. I also want to be clear, Nate, that the requirement about taking about political activity in our tax-exempt status is that we can't support candidates. So we can't say, you should vote for this person, or you should vote against this person. Not necessarily initiatives, no. It's political campaigns is the language. So my read of that is that we can take position on initiatives, for example, but it's candidates that we can't support. Do you have a different understanding of that, Sarah? Yeah, it's individuals. So when individuals showed up here wanting to hand out their campaign literature for re-election, that's a pretty clear no. I'm sorry? And it was shut down right away. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So I get that this is uncomfortable because it's different than what we've done in the past. I get that it asks more of you, and I will say that's intentional. It is intentional that it asks you to consider what are the different perspectives here that can share the values that we have. We don't all think alike here. And the growth is helping us understand that we need to figure out how to have the conversations across differences and invite voices into our groups that aren't normally heard and people who aren't normally seen. So I'm going to go to...
We are getting short on time.
Yeah, to the next slide then. So in terms of the process, it's laid out in the policy. Essentially, if you want something to happen, you should go through your ministry lead for the Faith in Action teams. That's Reverend Sarah. If you want to have a forum or you want to put out a flyer or have OUUC take a public position, that goes to Reverend Sarah. She'll talk with me. We'll decide if it needs to go to the board, or I'll check with the board about that. And then we'll take it from there. And I mean, the intention is to have the justice work of the congregation continue and be supported, and have that done in the larger container of holding different points of view. You want to talk about the other situation, Susan?
Just very quickly, there are a couple really specific things. We have UUA delegates every year that go to the larger UUA meeting, and we are still encouraging those people to vote their consciences. So there are some organizations that choose to tell people how to vote. We don't choose to tell our delegates how to vote. And the minister needs to decide when you can get the banner, which sounds like a funny thing, but can be very helpful. I think it's what Sarah talked about today, about showing people that liberal churches can be supportive of different things. And so you just need to get prior permission. And also Reverend Mary decides whether OUUC will sign on to a letter or petition. So, and then, so this is what we've talked about kind of exclusively today, is that speakers and literature shared at OUUC cannot advocate for only one position. And any printed or online material should clearly say that it's not an official endorsement from OUUC. And the example of that is Reverend Sarah's list of actions you can take. So we're trying to make sure that anything that we're saying is supported by OUUC has actually been endorsed by the larger body of the OUUC. And then that's it.
Are there any more questions that we want to address? Carbon, anything online that we haven't talked about?
And I do want to say, from a board perspective, we're putting in new policies, and we've been doing this with the governance manual, and every once in a while we go, oops, that one didn't work the way we wanted it to. So we're not saying, bad, you can't do this. We're saying, come to us and talk to us about it and help us figure out how to make the wording work for everybody, and help us make sure that we really are reflective of the values of our congregation and the values of the Faith in Action team. I mean, anybody can come to the board meeting, anybody can ask permission to speak to the board, and that's because the congregation is in charge. So don't feel like we're saying, you have to go off and implement this without talking about it. We want you to talk about it with us. We want to make it good. We're going to have to make changes. That's why we have a permanent governance committee now, because we are constantly reevaluating and changing and making the words make more sense to more people.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same with the operational policy. Our intention isn't to shut down conversation, it's to broaden the conversation. And that might be uncomfortable in some situations because it requires the teams to step outside of their small group. And we're asking you to do that intentionally. I'm asking you to do that intentionally. So stay in conversation with us, and we'll adapt and change the operational policy as we need to as well. If it's not working, we'll change it.
So this is a growth mindset issue. This is, you come to us and say, you know, this sentence, I feel like it knocks everything out that I want to do. And then we talk about that, we figure it out. We figure out if that was the intent. We figure out if those were the words that we wanted to use and what's not working and working. So this is not like somebody from on high telling you what to do. This is how we're trying to protect OUUC. Come and talk to us and work with us, you know, be on the governance committee, whatever. Do something so that we can get it to work the way we want it to work for all of us. That's the important thing.
Right, and all of us is bigger.
Yeah.
It's a much bigger group than it used to be. So, anything else online, Carbon, before we close here?
Yes, we have two here.
Thank you.
Literature can be on legislation. So this is Wendy Stephenson sharing. Literature can be on legislation and other actions, say cutting down legacy forests, with a short timeline. This feels too onerous.
So Wendy, what would be really helpful with that is if you could, if we could talk through an example. So what is it that's come through? What's the timeline on it? And how might that work? It could be that the board takes a position on legacy forests and anything that comes after that would be in alignment with that and we approve it. So I would say let's talk through that particular, a particular initiative or letter that's come forward and see what that looks like. So let's be in conversation. And I appreciate the gratitude for bringing this forward. We know that this is different. That's why we wanted to do this forum today. We knew that there were charged feelings about this and some difficulty around this, and that's why we wanted to start and continue the conversation. And we really do want to continue the conversation. So I'm going to ask that we just take a deep breath. Yeah, let's just take a breath. And then we'll extinguish our chalice with words from James Galasinski. Our faith, like a light, illuminates the path before us so that we can face hurt with love, cultivate compassion, live humbly in community, and confront despair with the awe of life. Though our flame is extinguished, our faith shines bright before us. Thank you, everyone, for taking time today. I look forward to further conversation. Thanks, Carbon.